Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full time and have a huge collection of videos for you to binge watch to your heart's content. I upload each week with a live stream each week as well. If you like what I do, please consider becoming a member of the channel by clicking the join button below or backing me on Subscribestar or Patreon where you can get access to all of the scripts I write for these vids if you prefer to read what I'm saying. I also have a Discord server with an active community and of course, if you think I've earned it, subscribe to the channel. Some call them skull dragons, some call them swamp or even death dragons, but we Dungeons & Dragons players typically call them black dragons. And on the prime material plane, there are very few draconic creatures with a more vile temperament and sadistic motivations than these wicked monsters. I'm not going to warn you about the content of this video. If you clicked on the link, you probably have some idea what you're in for, so sit back, grab yourself a beverage. We're about to get deeply nerdy. The last time I included a black dragon in my campaign, it was in the form of a dragon egg the player characters discovered just as it hatched. Mere moments later, the wormling had claimed its first victim as it sprayed acid over a hapless old lady in a city alleyway. The players had already dealt with powerful undead. They felt confident that they could handle a baby black dragon. Within a few days, the dragon was secretly plundering the city of its wealth, stockpiling a hidden hoard of treasure, manipulating the players into covering its rampant murder spree, and just for fun, raising one of the characters' own dead relatives as skeletons for the rest of the characters to fight. Within a few more days, the dragon took over the city. All the player characters who were still alive pretty much not in any position to attempt to oppose it. Moral of the story, that creature was lethal from the moment it crawled out of its egg. So let's talk about why. Dragons are supernatural creatures. They evolved into super predators long ago, but were further advanced and enhanced, particularly on the world of Toril, by the actions of other powerful races and entities, elevating a land-based drake into a winged form and then somehow binding that living organic body with elemental life force. We've seen this happen spontaneously with mortal races of the prime material plane who are exposed to the elemental planes for extended periods of time, and indeed, dragons are so extremely adaptable that these forms of transmutation and transformation of their extraordinary base biology happen with more apparent ease and regularity than many other forms of organic life. In fact, it happens a lot easier with humans, you may have noticed. Look at tieflings and genasi. Shadow dragons are a perfect example of how the true dragons seem to automatically enhance themselves with the most formidable aspects of the new dimension they find themselves in, gradually, over time. The elemental spirit of the true dragons is a unique hybrid, much like the creation of the first genies. Somehow the individual soul became fused and forever entwined with elemental power. So much so that most true dragons' metabolisms work on quite radically different forms of energy. They often survive without food or water for very long stretches of time, and unlike other biological beings, they don't weaken with age. They continually grow stronger and larger, right up until the very end of their lifespans, which can stretch into many thousands of years. Vuthadarastrix, as they're known in Draconic, the black or skull dragons are exemplars of the chromatic qualities of Tiamat's chosen children. They prefer to lead solitary lives and are extremely aggressive and predatory right down to the core of their being. Black dragons can lay their eggs up to 120 days after mating, but internal gestation only takes 30 days before they can be laid. There's no mating season, it largely depends on individual dragon behavior and personality, so they mate more frequently than others. It can take place anywhere and is much a matter of territory and dominance and personal urges as it is any sort of attraction between the dragons. So black dragons don't consider general appearance of their mate, only strength and cunning. They're also not loyal or affectionate outside of whatever is needed to safeguard their offspring and their territory. In keeping with their reputation for ferocity, black dragons usually fight for their mates. The females do most of the fighting, flying far and wide to locate a desirable male and then impressing him with a victory over a rival. Eggs are usually laid near the male's territory, and the male is left to guard the young. Black dragon parents are protective, but they give their offspring little support beyond the occasional bit of advice. Quite a few black dragons don't survive the actual hatching process, as the parents don't assist them by tapping the egg, as other dragon parents tend to do. The eggs are 1 foot long, weigh just over a pound, have an armor class of 12 and around 10 hit points each. They're kind of scaly and leathery, with pigmentation matching their appearance from ashen grey to an oily black. Total incubation of the egg takes around 480 days, and black dragon eggs require being immersed in a pool of acid capable of doing 1d4 damage per round, or being submerged in a swamp, a bog, or a marsh for that time. Black dragons have been known to make a bowl of precious metal composed of melted coins in which they drool a pool of birthing acid. So these may form a terrain hazard close to or within the lair of any of the dragons at any time. As with all the other true dragons, the birthing process is accompanied by a surge of elemental power within the region, like a spike in the parent's usual regional influence. The newly hatched black dragon emerges from its egg cramped and sodden. After about an hour, it's ready to fight, to fly, and to reason. It inherits a considerable body of practical knowledge from its parents, though such inherited knowledge often lies buried in the wormling's racial memory, unnoticed and unused until it's needed. Black dragon hatchlings will eat whatever leftovers their parents leave uneaten in the lair, and otherwise hunt using the most basic techniques the black dragons prefer, such as lying in a muddy bog, breathing water, and waiting to ambush its prey. When small, they feed almost exclusively on fish, mollusks, and swamp vermin, rats being a fairly staple part of their diet, so you'll always find heaps of bloated, rotting, and slimy rat corpses in a black dragon's lair, as well as piles of rotten, partially pickled fish. It's their snack food, so the smell is extraordinarily foul, making it hard to breathe. And of course, disease is rampant on every surface or any pool of liquid that's not acid, and is always teeming with harmful bacteria, so filth fever, or worse, is probably going to affect any creature that gets wounded or is stupid enough to eat or drink anything in the lair or from the water sources very close to the lair that have been contaminated. A black dragon's love of ambush hunting permeates their intelligence and personality. That's the core that their intelligence is built on. They have a basic drive to lure in, trap, and sadistically murder other creatures. This influence, combined with their intelligence and great experience over a long lifespan, gives rise to a complex and horrific behavior that is absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, very, very evil. All dragons have a desire to dominate, and they prefer other creatures around them to exist only at the dragon's whim. Even metallic dragons must be treated with a great deal of respect. Despite their more commonly good nature, they're still massive predators who can smell fear and hear heartbeats. They are far less likely to just up and murder any creature that acts arrogantly or without a proper sense of fear around them. The black dragon most certainly will react with lethal force, but more so than that, they know from birth that most humanoids are highly social creatures, and social creatures have a strong instinct to respond to each other. The green dragons have a highly complex behavior when it comes to manipulating this. The black dragons have a much more brutal and sadistic method. They prefer to capture, torture, and use the victim as bait to lure in others. If a party of adventurers is drawn to the agonized screaming of someone else, they may be walking right into the black dragon's ambush, and it need not be in a swamp or other dismal environment the monsters prefer to lair in. The black dragon can easily cover hundreds of miles in flight, or swimming along river courses to hunt in locations a humanoid might never suspect to encounter them, because they're highly intelligent, and that intelligence is built around their predatory cunning. Black dragons view others as either a mate, a bait, or food, but again, it's a very complex psychopathic behavior who they amuse themselves endlessly in their drive to hunt, entrap, torture, and murder other creatures. Obviously, talking to a skull dragon is extremely dangerous, but it may be the only thing that diverts one from immediately inflicting deliberately horrific, but not necessarily fatal injuries to a character, such as stripping all the flesh off their leg and bathing it in acid whilst hanging them from a tree, or just killing them on the spot, disemboweling them, but leaving them with enough blood in their body to survive is one of their favoured tactics as well. There are very few methods to divert, distract, or otherwise catch the dragon's attention. Each of them, of course, is very risky. Betrayal of allies is one of the best, an overt and completely self-interested act where the victim willingly becomes an accomplice to the dragon's hunting of their own kind, such as an adventurer telling the dragon the names of all their hirelings and where they're located with the party pack animals and any gathered treasure. This may grant the adventurer a momentary stay of execution as the dragon goes off to play a better game with those victims, calling them by name and murdering them one by one, and then all the pack animals, and taking the loot back to its lair. Here's a fun aspect to an encounter, while I think of it. Dragons may be in the act of transporting loot back to their hoard at any time when they have to stop or are stopped by a party of player characters, in which case they will deposit a heap of valuables nearby or perhaps even vomit up a great steaming pile of loot prior to engaging in combat because they carry it in their gullets. This makes an interesting dynamic element to add to the encounter for a couple of reasons. 1, it's certainly very distracting. 2, it's both difficult terrain and potentially pivotal to the fight, as the dragon may have grabbed an assortment of stuff and be planning on sorting it out at their leisure back at their lair, particularly magic items that it's not identified yet. There is a slim but not an insignificant chance that there is an object in that pile of treasure which could be used against the dragon. As a DM, you can select a character who makes the connection automatically due to some specific training or experience they have. You can roll a passive skill check for the whole party, or the dragon's own behaviour trying to keep the party away from the treasure may clue them into its tactical importance. The dragon may have recognised that it's made a tactical error and there's something that it can harm it in that treasure pile. To make it even more dynamic, what if the treasure is actually the loot of another dragon that the black dragon just raided the lair of, and it's following the trail of the black dragon thanks to having something in the loot that it can magically trace over a great distance? That dragon may show up at any time. The black dragon may use this idea as a bluff. The raiding dragon could be of any type. It may be another black dragon that it's trying to mate with, or potentially a rival. What if the black dragon was flying over a settlement and dropped its loot in the middle of the place, either accidentally or because it saw a threat, such as another dragon or a rock, maybe, and could not risk being weighed down by it if it had to fight? Perhaps the characters are on a boat, travelling across a lake or sea. Perhaps the loot bursts out of the lake, river or ocean, close to shore because the dragon is just putting it there for safekeeping as it deals with something under the water, such as a sea serpent, a giant dragon turtle or other aquatic threat. Either way, it will be coming back to retrieve that treasure soon, and it will either kill anyone around it or possibly be opening to bargaining to get it back, every single bit of it. Skull dragons are notoriously solitary, but they may have minions. Much like any other huge creature, they're capable of supporting a mini ecosystem around them. Though in the case of black dragons, this ecosystem is twisted and super aggressive. Kobolds are fanatically loyal and devoted to dragons, who they see as nothing less than divine beings. The true dragons are, for want of a better word, they're demigods, the physical perfection, beauty, and supernatural power over the elements. The lair and regional effects of the dragons lend a lot of confirmation of this to them. You simply can't tell a kobold that dragons are not divine, any more than you could tell a human that angels aren't. And this includes black dragons, unfortunately. Skull dragons recognise the values of kobolds. All dragons do. Well, the usefulness of them. They have no respect for kobold lives. Their treatment of them is extremely abusive, and over time the kobolds who survive will be winnowed down to only the most sadistic, murderous and depraved chaotic evil individuals in the population that justify every act of their master. In fact, they revel in the black dragon's evil and horrible behaviour. Black dragon kobold minions will extol every atrocity the dragon has committed as a virtue to be praised and lauded to all they encounter. They will delight in assisting the dragon in its hunts, sacrificing themselves willingly to act as bait in the ambush, or dying in droves just to hamper and injure the player characters, and of course setting a dizzying array of traps and perils in and around the dragon's lair, particularly trapping and tormenting creatures which serve the dual purpose of amusing the dragon if released, which may stay the execution of some of the kobolds, and of course attacking any unexpected visitors. Lizardfolk, who often dwell close to black dragon lairs, may also be heavily influenced by them, resulting in the black-scale lizardfolk variety. Big, stupid, aggressive brutes who enjoy smashing the bones of opponents with great clubs and tearing the limbs off with their large fanged jaws. Skull dragons don't just create these mutations to protect their lair, they also breed them deliberately to make far more interesting hunting victims, which is the unfortunate dual purpose that ultimately all of its minions serve. Sooner or later, that dragon is going to kill them. It's just a matter of time. The exception would be the less interesting, but more useful creatures that thrive in the dragon's domain, such as oozes, particularly gelatinous cubes. Black dragons are immune to acid, so they've been known to pick up gelatinous cubes and use them as a treasure cleaning utensil. Be careful they don't throw one at you. Interestingly, the hatred that skull dragons have for all other creatures extends to other dragons, who they can't help but see as both a threat to their food and fund supply, but also a direct threat to their own life. And with skull dragons, seeing the potential dominance of another creature is a measure also of their attraction to that creature. So, while there's also a lot of murder of black dragons of other dragons, there also is quite a few black dragon hybrids. That's twisted, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles with dragons. I must say that hybrid dragons are not a breed unto themselves. So they're always individuals, always distinct individuals. They're also very lucky to have survived at all, and the circumstances of their birth is always an interesting story. So it's extremely rare to ever encounter just one of them in any location, unless they were deliberately created by something capable of dominating even adult dragons. So that's where you may find a few of that particular type. If a black dragon mates with another type of chromatic dragon, this is a cross-chromatic hybrid, and the traits and abilities of the offspring are fairly predictable. It's more of a straightforward blending of both parents' features, behavior, and abilities. An example would be a cross-chromatic black-blue hybrid, which would look something like this. It would likely have the ability to breathe water, spit acid, and prefer to lair near water sources, but also have a much less murderous attitude towards its own minions and enjoy sending them out to capture victims who are forced to fight each other. The dragon's menagerie of captured beasts and the dragon's own minions for the dragon's amusement. So essentially it would be operating its own personal gladiatorial arena. The dragon might also trust its minions to gather and transport loot for it, a bit more than the black dragon would. A hybrid of a chromatic and metallic dragon is quite different. The resulting offspring is rarer still, and often the breeding will not produce any viable offspring at all, and the metallic dragons will not tolerate such offspring to live. So one of the parents will have tried to murder the dragon before it even hatched, and will still hunt it well into adulthood, you can guarantee it. An example of a gold and black dragon hybrid is a terrifying monster that's capable of ensnaring victims in nightmares and hunts people in their sleep in a fashion quite similar to Freddy Krueger of the Nightmare on Elm Street movie franchise. When metallic and chromatic dragons crossbreed, though, the resulting offspring always have unpredictable traits. They may even have entirely new traits that bear very little resemblance to either parent. They may be stronger or weaker, may be able to polymorph or not, have a new type of breath weapon, a radically different attitude. It's impossible to know beforehand what is going to come out of that egg, other than it may look like a cross between the two on a basic physical level. Black half-dragons and black dragonborn are a lot more predictable and resemble their parents in most respects. The extremely rare crossbreeding of something like an Asmar would be as unpredictable in the same way as the blending of a metallic parent and a chromatic parent. Black dragons consumed by trolls can result in trolls with draconic traits, and of course skull dragons are quite fond of necromancy, so there's lots more black dragon Dracoliches than there are gold dragon undead. The cult of the dragon knows full well that the intelligent elemental essence of departed black dragons are easier to bring back as Dracoliches, but even these fanatics have enough sense of self-preservation to not do it as often as they probably could, although Dracoliches of the black variety are far more common. During the long era that the elven global curse over the planet of Toril, known as the Dracoliche mythal, was in effect, all of dragon society was thrown into their version of the Dark Ages, where dragons were prevented from building up any sort of empires like they once had. The black dragons are typically solitary, full of hatred, and given to frenzied bursts of psychotic murder sprees anyway. So they have practically thrived during this long period of time. However, now that the Archwizard Samaster has ended the Draco Rage and the dreaded madness of the Kingkiller Star once and for all, the stage is set for a gradual return to dragons taking their rightful place as tyrant lords of huge domains once more, unless nations put everything on the line to drastically reduce the draconic population and brace themselves for their terrible retaliation. The same doom that ended the giants of Astoria eons ago. But, for now, I have to wonder what passes through a skull dragon's mind as the Kingkiller Star rises and they no longer get overtaken with their homicidal rage. I'm inclined to think that they may miss it, perhaps even want to return to that era, as it did give them a bit of an edge over the metallics in a way. However, that might mean having to make some sort of an alliance with elves, and black dragons really hate that humanoid race with quite an intense passion. Adult black dragons have an intelligence of 14. The ancients can reach around 16. So they certainly can learn magic the same way that humanoids do, reading tomes and collecting lore from scrolls and other wizard spellbooks. But traditionally, dragons are one with elemental forces and have an innate feel for magic that allows them to cast spells like a sorcerer. The most obvious focus of this manipulation of energy is with their breath weapon. The elemental power suffusing their entire body and coursing through their blood is concentrated, sort of compressed and squeezed out of their blood in a special organ near their lungs, generating an enormous burst of energy they expel from their throat. But once it is generated, it follows the same sort of rules as normal fire, acid, lightning and such. The generation of it, though, is supernatural, and dragons have their own secret arts of manipulating that process to make their breath weapon do extraordinary things. This is breath weapon meta magic, and in many ways you can easily emulate it near enough with the meta magic feats of other spellcasting classes. As a dungeon master, you don't have to explain every little nuance of dragon magical capability to the players during the game. A little bit of mystery goes a long way. So if a black dragon takes a moment during the fight to unleash their breath weapon on a large dark green crystal carved into the shape and relative size of a dragon skull, and creates a temporary draconic version of a spirit weapon, this is perfectly within the scope of draconic lore. Dragons of that age have a diverse arsenal of deadly tricks. You don't have to explain everything to the player characters. As I mentioned, with black dragons favouring necromancy, don't forget that dragons are capable of becoming more than just Dracoliches or dragon zombies. They may have their share of wights, vampires, wraiths, and even mummies. They also take the transformation into the shadow dragon by exposure to the energy of their shadowfell, like a duck takes to water. The 5th edition Monster Manual tells us that black dragons' filthy, acid-corroded lairs are full of vermin such as giant centipedes, flies, deformed, depraved and savage kobolds, treacherous acid pools. A black dragon's lair is a dismal cave or a grotto or a ruin that is at least partially flooded, providing pools where the dragon rests and where its victims can ferment. Within the lair, an adult black dragon will remain concealed until combat begins. It may have communicated with the party before then. At first sight, they appear more slender than other chromatic dragons, lean and powerful, kind of like a displacer beast with not a lot of spare fat around rippling, sinuous muscles. The black dragons from most worlds have distinctive forward-curving horns that frame and protect their face, a face which becomes more gaunt and skeletal as the dragon ages, which is how they get the name, the skull dragon. They have a lot of adaptations which help them live and move in the water, including webbed digits and a large frill which runs from the back of their head, usually down to the base of the neck, but sometimes all the way down the spine, though rarely will it extend down the tail at all. So this is an adaptation for just moving around in the water. They don't swim a lot, they tend to walk across the surface, kind of like a crocodile in some ways. Their hide is thick, but again grows less uniformly black and lustrous as they get older, and their wings often have a tattered edge to them late in life. They smell like rotting vegetation and foul water. Rotting meat wedges between their fangs, and their voice is a sibilant, threatening purr with a slightly phlegmatic gurgle from the acid drool that they tend to produce when contemplating a meal, which includes almost all conversations with humanoids. They're not the largest of the chromatic dragons. An adult black dragon is around 16 feet or 4.9 meters tall, 85 feet or 25.9 meters long, has a wingspan of 80 feet or 24.4 meters, and they only weigh about 80 tons, despite a steady diet of aquatic life and humanoids which they pickle in acid pools for several days before eating. When the black dragon hatches, its scales are small and glossy, and as it ages, the scales become larger, thicker, and more dull, helping it blend in with its swampy terrain. For 5th edition, they have the ability of the dragons to use lair actions and legendary actions, of course, which are vital to its surviving encounters with groups of player characters. First, on initiative count 20, losing initiative always ties, the black dragon takes a lair action to cause one of the following effects, and the dragon can't use the same effect 2 rounds in a row. Pools of water within the lair the dragon can see within about 120 feet surge outward in a grasping tide, so kind of like a sinkhole. Any creature on the ground within 20 feet of the pool must succeed on a DC 15 strength saving throw, or an athletics check usually, or be pulled up to 20 feet into the water and knocked prone. There's nothing that says that can't be acidic. A cloud of swarming insects fills a 20-foot radius where sphere centered in a point the dragon chooses within 120 feet of it. The cloud spreads around corners and remains until the dragon dismisses it as an action, uses this Lair action again, or dies. The cloud is lightly obscured. Any creature in the cloud, when it appears, must make a DC 15 Constitution saving throw, taking 3d6 piercing damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. A creature that ends its turn in the cloud takes 3d6 piercing damage. So it can maintain this cloud. If it foregoes using other Lair attack actions, it can just have that cloud sitting in the combat area the entire time. Magical darkness can spread from a point the dragon chooses within 60 feet of it, filling a 15-foot radius sphere until the dragon dismisses it as an action or uses the Lair action again or dies. The darkness spreads around corners. A creature with dark vision can't see through this darkness, and non-magical light can't illuminate it. If any of the effect's area overlaps with an area of light created by a spell of second level or lower, that spell that created the light is dispelled. So it's pretty good. For regional effects, the region containing a legendary black dragon's lair is warped by the dragon's magic, which creates one or more of the following effects. And these are pervasive. They're elemental effects. The land within 6 miles of the lair takes twice as long as normal to traverse, since the plants grow thick and twisted, and the swamps are thick with reeking mud. Water sources within 1 mile of the lair are supernaturally fouled. Enemies of the dragon that drink the water regurgitate it within minutes. I would definitely have them roll against filth fever. For fog typically lightly obscures the land within 6 miles of the lair almost perpetually. The dragon's influence on the region can also spontaneously generate shambling mounds and sometimes small outbreaks of blights. Plus, predatory vegetation naturally thrives in such areas anyway. If the dragon dies, the vegetation remains as it has grown, but other area effects fade over 1d10 days. So, have a look at all the different types of carnivorous plants that you can find and stock the area. Think also of the more unusual and horrific things that the Blade Dragon may unleash within its region, such as the reanimated zombie corpse of a former dragon rival. So a green dragon zombie, for example. Even after the dragon is killed, it will leave behind some sort of scar on the land. The older the dragon, the more pronounced and legendary this will be. An ancient black dragon is essentially going to leave behind a blighted area that will be favoured territory for hags and other foul monsters for centuries to come. Certainly the trees are going to grow weird and spooky for quite some time, even for just a regular adult black dragon. Remember, taking heavy advantage of the Black Dragon's ability to move underwater, create concealing and distracting swarms of bugs, clouds of fog, sacrifice fanatical and psychotic minions, and use its cunning to force a fight in an area of its choosing by using torture, manipulation, and terror. Okay, some examples of famous Black Dragons. Auragoth, known as the Black Death, was one of the most famous Black Dragons around the year 1372 DR. It was actually 2 dragons with an unusual close bond. They were twins. The twin sibling was Vaer and both dragons were capable sorcerers who desired immortality, but not by becoming Dracoliches. Attracted by the isolation of the region called the Mere of Dead Man and legends about the horde of Charden Sierra Vitriol and the treasures of flooded Uth Tower and other realms that they took up residence there searching. They especially hoped to find the twin lost crowns of Murgan, and reputed to have enhanced the empathic bond between the fraternal monarchs of Uth Tower and Yarlith, which would have suited their purposes and granted them magical powers. They started posing as only one dragon to confuse their enemies, named Auragoth. And soon tales were told across the realms about the legendary Werum of the Mere, a strange black dragon that could appear out of nowhere and assault adventurers. Despite not really being interested in becoming Dracoliches, they did approach the local cult of the Dragon Cell and use them for their plans. Thanks to the cultists, the Black Dragon brothers recovered one of the twin crowns of Murgan. I don't know if they ever got both of them, though. Sach Malsveer, the Sun Swallower, the Chosen of Talona, better known as Thos Faerun, was an adult black dragon living in the Lizard Marsh near the town of Daggerford during the time of the Second Sundering, mated with the black dragon Chileen of the High Moor and Western Heartlands, a very famous legacy. She herself was the great-granddaughter of the black worm Dracolich, Auragoth, the Old One. Her parents were Vilholin and Wasterik, who these black dragons formed House Auragoth, an organisation and lineage of black dragons which dominated Auragoth on the High Moor. Their house was originally a powerful arcanist family from the fallen Empire of Netheril, which, as you would expect, was somewhat obsessed with draconic power and suspected of accidentally unleashing ancient evil on the world related to the long-lost serpent race. The house was revived under the direction of Kellan Thornoragoth in 90 DR, who plumbed the ancient lore until he found a secret of necromancy that transformed him into the Dracolich. Auragoth was well known along the Sword Coast, especially in Arm, as a lucrative adventuring spot centred on a sprawling villa complex in the eastern part of the High Moor and the tunnels under it that extended to the Serpent Hills, with tales circulating about heaps of gems for the taking. As such, the house was frequently targeted for plunder by the Cult of the Dragon, Yuan-Ti from nearby Najara, and adventurers in general. These efforts were summarily squashed, with offenders routinely killed or transformed into beasts through forbidden magics. Murgan devin nassander was hatched in 659 DR in Zakara. He wandered the south for decades before settling down on the Cholton Peninsula, where he gained a much-deserved reputation for terrorizing the inhabitants for hundreds of miles around him. So fearsome were the tales that they even reached a certain drow elf named Gristu-Erden, who used his readings about Murgan devin nassander's folklore to fool a red dragon that he was a black dragon trapped in dark elf form, thanks to a little detail about the black dragon's eyes being an unusual lavender colour, just like Grist's own. There are many black dragons across the realms and many worlds. They have been around for hundreds of thousands of years and consider the world to be theirs, much like the giants do, or did. Even ancient cultures like those of elves are mere infant civilizations by their standards, and the woefully short lifespans of mortal creatures cause black dragons to see them as little more than interesting animals and challenging meals. Please hit the like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, if you think I've earned your subscription. Check out my Subscribe Star for Patreon links for all the full scripts for these videos, buy some Teespring merchandise, wear your geek with pride, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.
Another excellent video. What dragon are you going to cover next?
I'm glad you liked it. I don't know. Reds, maybe? What do you think? Or should we do a metallic? Oops.